Hey, this is Royce Hall, your host of the Coffee Dreaming Podcast. I'm a Salesforce consultant by day and RevOps podcaster by night. And today I have a special treat for you. I'm speaking with Sam Barcus of New Leaf Consulting. Sam has been a consultant for over 50 years, which I think is awesome. It means he's got a well of resource for all of us to draw from. And we talk about self-awareness, always learning, how to be authentic. We also discuss outcome selling and what it means to build your network with generosity. I hope you learned something just like I did, and please enjoy, like, and subscribe. So, Sam, you are with New Leaf Partners, and I've been very impressed by your career. I was just looking at it this morning. You have over 50 years in the consulting business with PwC, IBM, and now New Leaf. That's quite the accomplishment. I am not nearly that far in, so it's an honor to speak with you today. And I would think that after 50 years, like 50 years in anything is a very long time. So I would love to hear from you, like, what is it about what you're doing that motivates you? Like, why are you in this? Like, what keeps you going?
Sure. You make me sound though like the TCU basketball coach. I saw him on ESPN. Well, he says I'm approaching old.
Well, no offense. I like that. I respect that you've been at something for so long. I don't think of it as old. I think it as it's kind of like fine wine, right? You've
Sure.
matured and you have something to share with us that the
Of
rest of
course.
us don't have. I think of. Did you ever read Tuesdays with Maury?
I did not. No.
That was something that stood out to me with Tuesdays with Maury. He was this professor, and he was going through a degenerative disease,
Yeah.
and he's mentoring this younger person, and he keeps saying like, I just have more experience than you. Like, I don't regret getting old. I don't regret this disease because I have experiences that you don't have, and that makes me wiser. So, I appreciate your career.
Sure. Well, thank you. Let me give you the quick synopsis of that career because I've taken some pivots, as they're called, or inflections. I started as a programmer for Texas Instruments and was recruited by Price Waterhouse Consulting, moved to Memphis, then Nashville. And so PW taught me how to be a consultant. I ended up running the practice in Nashville and then spent my last 2 years there in New York, both helping create and then teaching and coaching the firm's consultative selling methodology, which turned me into a teacher and a coach. And that led me to IBM. So I was part of IBM University for about 10 years when Gersten was there. And our mission, our charter was to transform the sales force and the engineers into being more consultative, which was, of course, my background at Price Waterhouse. Towards the end of that tenure, started New Leaf. Still to this day, have two German partners, colleagues, and begin to do work with companies like Cisco or their partners or other technology companies that became, our client base. But all of that time, I think, if you were to sum it up, my wheelhouse is outcome selling, which goes back to being consultative, leadership development, because I work with lots of successive leaders over the years and have crafted some leadership development workshops, and coaching. And coaching is particularly important to me, and it's I guess, my why, if you know Simon Sinek. And the reason I say that, Royce, is that it's my why because my goal is to help I refer to the people I work with as my athletes. When our son was little, I was a soccer coach. And it strikes me that a corporate person and a sports athlete, we start the same way. They have talent, they have knowledge, they have skills. And my job as their coach is to elevate those, to help them exceed their potential, to be the best version of themselves. And there are three ways I focus on doing that. One, I want them to be self aware. So I use various instruments to help them understand their strengths, to how they communicate. I even do with some athletes their emotional intelligence or their personality. Second pillar of that is learning. I spend 8, 10, 12 hours a week learning, but that's what I do. That's my job. But I push my athletes to at least spend a couple of hours learning. And I want them to learn more than whatever they do for a living. So a few weeks ago, I sent my athletes an article on how gratitude is healthy for you, which it is, by the way. So I want them to have a more holistic learning journey, so to speak, and whether it's a podcast or something to read. Actually, last week I had them listen to a podcast about the art of asking beautiful questions, which is important for any professional. And then the third pillar of that coaching philosophy is that I want them to be authentic, to be true to their values, to be true to their identity, which can be difficult in a large political organization. So that gives you kind of full circle my inflection points and how I've ended up doing what I love to do, which is to be a corporate coach.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with me. You said something towards the beginning of that about outcome selling. Now that seems like an interesting term. Can you dive into that a little bit more? What do you mean by outcome selling versus, I think you classified that as like a subcategory of consultative selling. So, I think of like I've got all my books back here. There's like the challenger sell, the gap
Yeah.
selling, everything. So what do you mean by outcome selling?
Well, I've read most of those. For me, and it's just, how often salespeople or companies chase the new shiny object.
Oh yeah.
Well, outcome selling is kind of the shiny object in today's world, but it's still consultative selling. For me, it goes back to the roots, the way Pricewaterhouse taught me to sell. And to simplify that for you, it means you're very client focused. I'll go through in a moment what I believe is critical to being an outcome seller or a leader or an engineer, but it really fundamentally means that you put the client first, that you think about what is important to the client, you align around their needs, their expectations, because you will never get to where you need to be if you don't listen to what they're saying to you, pick up on those little gems that they're saying to you, and whether it's Price or Cisco or a partner or Microsoft or whomever, you have to come back to that customer with something that's going to help them move to where they want to be.
Mm.
And you can call it a solution. But so interesting. Thank you for asking me that. It still all comes back to consultative selling, putting client first, understanding what they want to get to, and helping navigate and guide them to a very successful result.
Yeah, I think that mindset is incredibly important. If you go to your LinkedIn, you talk about helping sellers. You also talk about helping marketers. But you know, even in operations, that's incredibly important to be client focused. I'm in I'm in the Salesforce world. Doing Salesforce projects, and oftentimes you see projects go off the rails when we lose that kind of end vision of like what's truly most beneficial to the client. And I think that's not just on the sales team, it's not just on the marketing team. Like everybody in the organization needs to have awareness of what you're talking about. And the consultative selling is almost like too honed in. Like we're all have to have a consultative mindset.
Do you know the word scope creep, or the two words, the language
Oh yeah.
scope creep? That's exactly what. Well, if you lose track of what say, clients like elephants have long memories,
Yeah.
whether it's the budget you've committed to them, or the scope of the project, or the timing, all of those things. And what happens, and I learned that lesson many times the hard way, is that if you're not careful, that scope will creep on you.
Hmm.
And clients, my experience is clients are relatively unforgiving with respect to what you've promised them. See, I was an IBMer for a long time. As I mentioned, when I started, we only had 5% services, 95% product. That was a long time ago. But Gersten was determined to move us to a more software services company. So we surveyed most of our customers, large, medium, small. One thing came back: make and keep promises.
Mm.
Make and keep promises. I've never forgotten that, because that's the essence of whether you're in operations or whether you're a marketer or whether you're a salesperson or engineer. You have to know how to make and keep promises. You do, or the scope creep will jump in and bite you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea as well. Of you have to make and keep promises, and you have to be mindful of that because I think you've probably seen this in the consultative world as well. Is the client, we see that new shiny object. So it's like, hey, can you, while we're in here, can you do this? Like, I'm going through a home renovation right now, and I'm probably like the worst client because, I'm like, oh, hey, can you, like, while you're in there, can you do this? While you're in there, can you do that? And as much as anything, as a client, that derails it. And, sometimes, you as a consultant have to come back in and say, well, that like we can focus on that, but now we're taking away from the main initiative. Do you actually want to divert time away from that thing to get this tiny little whatever over here? And that of course bring me back to my senses and say no, like I really need you to finish the floors.
Well, that's the art of managing expectations. Again, whether you're a salesperson or a marketer or an engineer, you have to become very effective in managing expectations. Sometimes telling people things they don't want to hear, but you have to say it to them so their ears don't close up. And that's one of the great lessons I learned at Price. They taught me how to do that because so many times I had to tell a client, well, what you're wanting us to do doesn't make sense,
Mm.
or it's not going to help you get to where you want to be, or it's going to do more damage than good. All of those things. And yet, you know how people are, human beings, they get in their head, they want to do something. And, it's a little challenging sometimes to dissuade them. But you have to have the ability to do that if you're going to be effective, regardless of the role you're playing in that process, in that engagement process.
Yeah, I had a sales coach once upon a time. His name was Jim Brown, not the football player, the sales coach. And one of the things that he always said was the sales conversation doesn't actually start until somebody says no. Because like if it's always just yes, 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 you just kind of have the salesman happy ears, or even as a prospect or a client, like you're just saying yes and going along. But it's when you have that pushback that you actually have to put on your thinking cap and get to a solution.
That is so, so true. And another element of that I learned is all the selling happens when you leave the room. You ever heard that?
I have, yeah, that's
It's
good.
true. It is true. And it's why expanding your network. So I do that with my athletes. If you're going to rise in any company, Cisco partners, Microsoft, IBM, you have to have mentors, you have to have sponsors, you have to have a broad network. And that is part and parcel to me of over time. I think the fundamental quality or characteristic that may sound odd as a differentiator is generosity, knowing how to be generous to others. What I mean by that is you've probably run into salespeople that go to customer end of quarter and say, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you. Buy something." It
Right.
doesn't work. It doesn't work. You stay in touch with people routinely, and that is an aspect of being generous. You don't go to someone and say, "What can you do for me?" You go to them and you ask, "What can I do for you?"
Mm.
It's a differentiator. It is.
Well, let me ask you another question. This has been incredibly helpful. Thank you for sharing us your methodology and your thoughts. Uh, so we've kind of gotten into like where you are, like kind of how you coach,
Uh-huh.
and we've kind of gotten into this as well. But I'm curious what you would say would be like the top one or two things that you've like really learned in your career that you're like, man, I wish somebody had told me this earlier. I would have figured this out earlier because I'm sure that there's people who are earlier in their career that maybe need to learn the same lessons that you've learned.
I think the core to that, to answer your question, is the power of relationships. And again, when you're younger, you don't think, part of that is you just don't have a very broad view early in my career. But over time, I've come to realize that the power of relationships is invaluable. And it's back to that broader your network, those people that you get to know will always be there for you. And whether it's happened, and it's happening in the industry these days, where companies are going through labor force reductions, and sometimes individuals that have worked the same place forever are now put in the position of having to look elsewhere. The best way to do that is to reach out to your network. I mean, I get it. You got to post on LinkedIn. You got to get your bio up to date and all that business. But fundamentally, you have to have a strong network that you can contact and just stay in touch, and let the and it, I've always been fascinated how people are willing to help. But it comes back to the quality of relationships. Tom Stevenson was my friend, IBM friend, that brought me into Cisco as a consultant many years ago. And he and I wrote a book together called The Relationship Advantage for that very reason, because both of us had learned, both at IBM and then me as a consultant with New Leaf, that there is power in relationships. There's importance in relationships. And it goes back to what I said. You've got to nurture them. And it's demanding. If you have a large network, it's hard to stay in touch with people, and find ways to do that. One of the little things that Price taught me, and I still do it to this day, is that if you run across an article or a podcast or a book that you think might be of interest to someone send it to them. It's just a little nice way to let someone know you're thinking of them, that they're on your mind, and you're not asking them for anything. You're being generous. You're giving something to them. So
Hmm.
that's just an example. But anyway, it's to answer your question, it's the importance of significant relationships that took me a long time for that. I think working with Tom, he was a very dear friend and mentor for me at IBM. But I think that the effort he and I put into writing that book got me to start to think about that very topic.
I love that. And you mentioned LinkedIn. I think of you see people that have tens of thousands of
Yeah,
LinkedIn connections and LinkedIn followers, and LinkedIn is a fantastic tool, I think, for getting relationships started. Right, it's not enough to just have somebody on LinkedIn. It opens up
sure.
a door, right? But you have to walk through that, and then to your point, nurture that. How do you actually build a meaningful relationship with that person? LinkedIn, any of your social media are just a tools to the ends of building a significant relationship.
That is so, so true. I love LinkedIn. I use it a lot, but it only opens the door. And you have to find ways to nurture and grow those relationships that you have there. And in the wherever organization you're part of, it's in the community that you're in. I'm very active in our local church in our men's Bible study. We go early every Wednesday morning. One of my favorite parts of that is the check in, where we go around the room and talk about what's going on in our lives. And it may sound odd, but we built almost a sense of brotherhood in that community, because we share with each other what is important to us. The good, the bad, the whatever. And I think that's important, to have those kinds of relationships in our life. It is, regardless of where they are.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely, and I think that's really as tech forward as we are and as tech enabled as we are,
Mhm.
the tech can't solve that, right? Again, it can enable that, but I think, as far as building personal connections, there's no replacement for hand to hand, face to face, meetings, and having those groups that you can be a part of. I think it's harder to do that in the tech enabled world because we don't have to. We can be lazy. We can stay at home on the couch. So you have to get out and make those meaningful relationships.
You do, and you have to learn how to leverage the technology. It's the reason I have all those books behind me, because I love to read, and I like your background. The virtual background's become the hot newest thing, and it sort of it. Sometimes I get on a call and there's a beach behind the person with the trees. I think, okay.
I used to do that because it was obvious. I hate it when somebody. I maybe hate is too, but hard of a word. It's disingenuous to me when somebody has like an almost real looking background, but then you can move and they move and you can see like the dirty laundry behind them. Uh,
Yeah.
so I always just went with the beach because I'm like, I'm not at the beach.
Oh gosh, it's all
Uh,
about community.
well, Sam, tell us a little bit about New Leaf, what you're doing, and hopefully there's some listeners that are tuning in and say, I like what Sam has to offer. Tell us who's a good fit for you and how to get a hold of you.
Well, you can, of course, reach me easily via LinkedIn, and it really is back to my wheelhouse and New Leaf's wheelhouse, and that is outcome selling. That takes on a lot of different forms, whether it's sales leadership, individual salesperson development. It actually can involve joint account planning or account strategy. One of the things my German partner created is what called a leader lab. So we do those after a series of trainings where monthly we get the leaders or the individuals back together and talk about real world problems. So that's an example of some of the things we do in the what's I'll just overall call outcome selling or consultative selling. And then leadership development, I spent a lot of thought into that, and I think of it as being inclusive. And so the things I've done around leadership workshops have to do with how to create an inclusive culture, how to bring people in, how to help them understand they belong in that environment. And a lot of the other things I've learned working with leaders over the years, I've codified them into, this the workshop. The I actually call it inclusive leadership in a hybrid world, meaning we work at home, we work in the offices. And actually, I took my many years of coaching experience and crafted it or put it into a coaching skills workshop. Because the reality is, whether you're sales, engineering, marketing, whatever, to be a leader, you have to be a manager and a coach. You have to know how to do all three. Now, you don't in your head say, okay, I'm going to be a coach now for the next 30 minutes. I'm going to be a manager for the next 30. But you have to know how to fluidly move between those. And you have to be clear about what the person you're working with, your employee or your teammate, that you're coaching them or you're managing them or you're being a role model and being a leader for them. So that's one of the other things I did over the last couple of years. And then my coaching is my coaching. Mechanically, I've given you my desire, the athlete being the best version of themselves, and my coaching philosophy. Uh, the way that actually works is I do what's called an origin based interview to get us started. And what I mean by that is I go back and I want to hear about the one or two people that influenced them, whether parent or coach or sibling. And that's part of how you get to know someone. And then I ask them, just like my inflection points, programmer, consultant, teacher. Because again, if you're going to coach someone, you have to get to know them. And that's what an origin based interview is. I find out about their background, their role, their responsibilities, their challenges in that role. But I also have people tell me a story, two stories. I want to hear a positive story where you succeeded, and I want to hear where you failed because we learn from both. We actually learn more when we fail. And that's part of how I get to know that athlete, knowing where they stumble. But I always finish with a question, and this may sound odd to you. I want to know that athlete's aspirations because I can coach to aspirations. Many times I'll get an answer, well, I want to have a title or I want to be a certain level where I make this much money. And I said, well, I can help you do that, but that's not an aspiration. It's an outcome, it's a goal. I want my athletes to think in terms of aspirations because it's back to what you asked me, my purpose, my why. And so that's part of how I get started. That becomes a coaching agreement. I actually work with my athletes 7 months. I learned a long time ago you can't coach someone a month or two and make a difference. I need at least 7 months, 7 sessions to make an impact because that coaching agreement becomes the roadmap we work together. Monthly, we have a 45-minute meeting. Every time there's homework, I keep going back to that coaching agreement because I coach to whatever area we're focusing on: personal brand, business acumen, financial savvy, sometimes emotional intelligence, helping them maybe broaden their industry knowledge, um, being an effective leader. I have a very strong leadership playbook that I use. So, but again, I don't do shrink wrap coaching. Every time I meet an athlete, I want to understand them so I can craft a coaching agreement that reflects where they want to be, back to those aspirations over those 7 months. The other thing I do, because it's where mentoring falls down, by the way, and I always help my athletes get mentors because that's so important. But sometimes mentor relationships go awry because people get busy and we were going to meet monthly and all of a sudden 3 months go by. I'm very disciplined about that. That coaching cadence is once a month, and we stick to it unless there's something, really, there are always challenges, and I get that. But there's a cadence you have to stick with. That said, my athletes can see my calendar. And if something comes up, they have a presentation, or they've got a challenge with a customer or a partner, or they've got some issue with a colleague, they can grab time on my calendar and I'll guide them through that. Even if they want to practice a presentation on me, I've even helped athletes improve their writing skills. And reason I've gotten to be an effective writer communicator, my wife was head of communications for IBM. She actually worked for Gerstner, and that's where I met her. And I've learned so much from her about how to be an effective communicator, to be an effective writer. And so that's an area often I'll work with my athletes, the whole idea of executive presence and what that really means. By the way, it's gravitas, how you communicate, and demeanor. That's what presence is. So I hope that kind of answers that question for you, what we do and specifically what I do.
Yeah, I think that answers it very well, and makes me want to continue this podcast for another like 3 or 4 hours. Like so many good things here.
I just appreciate you asking me. Thank you. I do.
Well, Sam, it's been great to have you on the podcast today. I'll drop a link in the video in the video comment section where people can find you, can find New Leaf, and hopefully we can get you some more followers and some more clients. We really appreciate you sharing with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I've enjoyed it. Thank you, Royce. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Bye bye.